This morning, we arrested Lawrence Taylor.
A Hall of Fame linebacker, a 16-year-old trafficking victim, a felony sexual assault charge that carries up to 4 years in prison. What he actually got was 6 years probation and 0 jail time.
I'm just happy it's over with, and it's time to move on.
That is how he reacted when the sentence finally came down, and it was nowhere near what most people expected. Here's the full story. The case. May 5, 2010. Lawrence Taylor, the Pro Football Hall of Fame linebacker for the New York Giants, was at the Holiday Inn in Montebello, New York, in Rockland County. He was 51 years old. He had retired from football in 1993 after a 13-year career that ended with a Hall of Fame induction in 1999. By 2010, he was living mostly in Florida but spent frequent time in the New York area. He already had a public record that included drug arrests, a tax evasion conviction, and DUI history. The girl brought to his room was Christina Fierro, 16 years old, a runaway from the Bronx who had been reported missing earlier that year. The man who brought her was Rashid Davis, 36, a convicted felon on parole who had been released from New York State Prison in March 2008 after serving time for first-degree manslaughter. According to federal court documents, Davis had recruited Fierro in April 2010, offering her a place to stay in his Bronx apartment for about $150 a week and promising she could make money, first as a stripper and then through commercial sex. On May 5, he texted Fierro demanding she have sex with a client for $300. When she refused, he assaulted her, then drove her to the Holiday Inn against her will. She was told to say she was 19. Early on May 6, police arrived at the hotel. They had been tipped off by a relative of Fierro's after she tried to call for help. They woke Taylor and arrested him.
This morning, we arrested Lawrence Taylor.
He was charged with third-degree rape, patronizing a prostitute, and related counts.
Lawrence Taylor is denying these charges?
At arraignment, bail was set.
The court is setting bail in the sum of $75,000.
Taylor posted the $75,000 bond and was released. He pleaded not guilty in July 2010. A grand jury indicted him on criminal sexual act and sexual abuse charges, and he was set to face trial. The case against Davis ran on a separate parallel track. Federal prosecutors charged him with sex trafficking of a minor through force, fraud, or coercion, a charge that carried a mandatory minimum of 15 years if he'd gone to trial and lost, with a maximum of life. He was arrested the same day as Taylor. Police found details of the Holiday Inn room in his possession after he returned to the Bronx with Fierro and the $300. For months, his legal team denied that intercourse occurred at all. A source close to Taylor said his team's early position was that he had only masturbated in the room, and they planned to use a sworn statement from a 23-year-old woman who claimed Fierro had told her she did not have sex with Taylor. His business manager, Mark Lepselter, said at the time he was pleased a witness had come forward to support that version of events. That position did not hold through the fall. Taylor resisted a plea for months before accepting a deal in January 2011, pleading guilty to 2 misdemeanors, sexual misconduct and patronizing a prostitute. Under oath, he admitted to having sex with the 16-year-old, paying her $300, and acknowledged that DNA evidence matched. He stated he now understood she was legally incapable of consent at 16. On March 22, 2011, he was sentenced 6 years probation, $1,300 in fees, registration as a level 1 low-risk sex offender, no jail time. The district attorney's office did not seek incarceration, citing in part information Taylor had provided to authorities on human trafficking investigations in several jurisdictions. That is the sentence the title points to. A felony charge that carried up to 4 years in state prison, resolved with probation and a registry number. The plea and the sentence didn't happen in isolation. By 2010, Taylor already carried a public record that included a 1988 NFL drug suspension, multiple post-retirement drug arrests in the 1990s, a tax evasion conviction, and traffic violations. None of those prior cases involved jail time either. The Rockland County case was, in that sense, one more entry added to a list that already existed before Fierro ever walked into that hotel room. So how did he react to it? Not in one moment. In stages, from denial to a courthouse interview, to a sentencing day surrounded by reporters, to a civil trial 18 months later where he called the result redemption. Each of those moments is on record. Some of them are on camera. The reaction. The first real window into Taylor's state of mind came not from him, but from the man standing next to him. Hours after the arrest made headlines, Taylor's attorney, Arthur A. Dalla, sat down with reporters and described a client who was nowhere near the cool, untouchable persona the public knew from his playing days. Before that interview even happened, the arresting officers themselves had already framed Taylor's behavior in a specific way: cooperative, not combative. Whatever turmoil was happening privately, publicly, he gave police no resistance at all.
Mr. Taylor was very cooperative, when he was taken into custody by our detectives.
That same arrest report noted his background for context that had nothing to do with the charge itself: a Hall of Fame induction in 1999, a turn on Dancing with the Stars the year before, and a highly publicized struggle with drug addiction that had already followed him for 2 decades. None of that history made the new charge less serious, but it shaped how reporters covered his reaction from the very first hours, not as a stranger's downfall, but as the latest chapter for someone the public had already watched fall and recover once before.
Yeah, he's devastated. He's absolutely devastated.
Adala wasn't speaking in the abstract. He framed it as a relationship built over years.
I've known Lawrence for 20 years, and I've represented him for the better part of the last 15.
Watching Taylor manage a reputation he had spent more than a decade trying to repair. The attorney's read was that the accusation itself, regardless of outcome, threatened to drag Taylor backward, back toward the version of him defined by addiction and arrests, rather than the version he'd been building since. That tension between the two Taylors, the rehabilitated elder statesman and the relapsing headline, would define nearly every public reaction that followed. The earliest defense, though, wasn't built on devastation. It was built on flat denial. Adala told reporters outright, "My client did not have sex with anybody. Lawrence Taylor did not rape anybody," describing his client as a loving family man. Taylor himself, asked about the arrest, downplayed his own significance entirely, telling reporters, "I'm not that important." That denial held a specific shape for months. Not that the encounter never happened, eventually, but that it never crossed the line into intercourse at all. The strategy banked on a 23-year-old witness, a sworn statement, and a claim that the charge itself rested on a version of events Fierro had supposedly contradicted to someone else. It was a defense built to survive a trial. It was not built to survive a guilty plea. That posture lasted through the summer of 2010 and into the fall. But by January 2011, the defense had collapsed into something else, an admission wrapped in justification. Taylor stood before a judge and confirmed the encounter happened. He just insisted he'd been misled.
"She told me she was 19, Taylor told the judge.
When the judge pressed him on whether he understood that her stated age wasn't a legal defense against the underlying charge, his answer was short.
"I do now."
Outside the courthouse, a local news crew caught up with Taylor directly. The exchange is one of the only times he answered questions about the case in his own voice, on camera without a script.
Well, I look at it this way, it's not all about me.
He framed the plea not as an admission of wrongdoing toward Fierro, but as a decision made for the people around him.
I had to look at, what's in the best interest of my family, my kids, my wife.
Adala backed that framing up, repeating almost word for word the same calculation Taylor had just given reporters, that the plea wasn't about guilt. It was about ending the exposure for everyone involved.
He decided it was in the best interest of he and his family and the young woman involved here to dispose of the case the way we did today.
Then, asked what he wanted to say to the fans who'd stuck with him. Taylor pivoted entirely away from the case and toward gratitude.
I've had a lot of emails and blogs, they call it nowadays. I'm really blessed to have fans like that.
The reporter following him noted that, from a legal standpoint, the outcome was about as favorable as Taylor could have hoped for: a felony rape exposure reduced to misdemeanors with no incarceration.
I'm just happy it's over with, and it's time to move on. I mean, my life is not defined by this, so I'm ready to move on and go forward.
Taylor's own language echoed that sense of having dodged something larger. Sentencing day itself, March 22, 2011, carried a different tone outside the courtroom. Adala again spoke for his client.
During the press conference following the sentencing, the girl denied being a prostitute and said another man forced her to go to Taylor's hotel room and
This time describing the entire experience in terms of relief rather than vindication. But the same press conference carried a second voice, Fierro's.
"I think Mr. Taylor should have to go to jail for what he did to me. My life has changed because of him. He took something precious from me."
Standing with her attorney, she rejected the idea that the case was simply closing quietly. She wasn't speaking about probation paperwork. She was speaking about what had happened to her. That contrast, Taylor's camp calling the sentence a relief, Fierro calling it insufficient, is the emotional center of the entire case. Fierro and her legal team expressed open disappointment that no jail time was imposed. Taylor's side called the same outcome a fair resolution, and eventually a win. Part of why the sentence looked the way it did comes down to statute, not discretion. Once Taylor pleaded to those specific misdemeanors involving a minor, the consequences weren't really up for negotiation. His own attorney made that point explicitly to reporters, walking through exactly how little control anyone in the courtroom actually had over the outcome. Not the judge, not the district attorney, not Taylor's own legal team. The 6 years of probation, he explained, was set by the state legislature and applied automatically the moment Taylor entered his plea, regardless of what either side might have preferred to negotiate. The registration level itself had a specific narrow definition, and Idala spelled it out for cameras. That was met, according to Idala, with a shrug rather than alarm from his client, framed around the idea that everyone in his neighborhood already knew where he lived anyway. The judge postponed setting that registration level until a separate hearing weeks later, and Taylor's legal team initially planned to argue against registration entirely.
It's a level 1, which would basically mean once a year, Mr. Taylor needs to tell his local law enforcement authority where he lives.
On the basis that the statute was designed for predators.
His response was, well, the captain of the police department comes to my house on a regular basis to socialize with me, so I don't think it's going to be a big secret to anybody about where I live.
Not buyers who claimed they didn't know a victim's age. That argument didn't succeed. He registered as level 1 anyway. Idala, for his part, framed the entire plea as something Taylor wasn't proud of, patronizing a prostitute who turned out to be underage, while still expressing cautious confidence that the case could have been won outright at trial. He chose not to take that risk. What's notable, watching the full arc of his reaction across these months, is the absence of any moment where Taylor directly addressed Fierro on camera. He addressed fans, he addressed reporters, he addressed his own family's interests. The only first-person statement of regret toward her came later, not at sentencing, but 18 months further down the line in a different courtroom entirely. The redemption. By late 2011, the criminal case was closed, but it wasn't the end of Taylor's legal exposure. On November 28, 2011, Gloria Allred's firm filed a federal civil lawsuit on Fierro's behalf in Manhattan, seeking damages under the Trafficking Victims Protection Act, a state gender violence statute, and common law assault and battery claims. Allred had already been a visible presence at sentencing months earlier, and her language there set the tone for everything that followed. Lawrence Taylor should be in the Hall of Shame, not the Hall of Fame. That line, delivered at the time of his criminal sentencing, became the framing device for the entire civil case. Allred argued the misdemeanor plea let Taylor escape with a label, patronizing a prostitute that erased what she said was the real story. A trafficking victim, visibly injured, brought to a hotel room against her will. She pushed for Fierro to be allowed a victim impact statement at sentencing. The judge denied it, since the case had resolved as a misdemeanor. She also pointed specifically to a swollen eye and visible fear that she said Taylor ignored or failed to register at all, arguing that a buyer who couldn't notice that much wasn't paying attention because it was inconvenient to. Allred's broader strategy was never just about one verdict. Across her career representing survivors of assault, harassment, and trafficking, she had built a pattern of pairing criminal cases with civil litigation, using press conferences and public statements to keep pressure on defendants long after a criminal case quietly closed. This case fit that pattern exactly. Her stated goal was to shift the public narrative away from prostitute and toward child sex trafficking victim, and to criticize what she characterized as light criminal penalties for the buyers who create demand for trafficked minors in the first place. The civil suit, when it landed, was deliberately framed as more than a single case. Filed in U.S. District Court in Manhattan, case number 11 CIV 8573, with co-counsel Marianne Wang, Allred described it as potentially the first lawsuit of its kind brought against a buyer, rather than a trafficker, under the federal trafficking statute. The theory was straightforward and aggressive. If buyers like Taylor faced real financial consequences, demand for trafficked minors would shrink. Allred put the deterrence argument in blunt terms. If buyers know they may be liable for significant damages, it may make them think twice. At the press conference announcing the suit, Fierro herself read a statement describing the beating she suffered from Davis, being driven to the hotel against her will, and the ongoing trauma that followed. Taylor's team did not sit quietly through that framing. Idala dismissed the entire civil case publicly, calling the allegations a fairy tale and accusing Allred of chasing media attention and a payout from a wealthy defendant. The court itself sided partly with Taylor before the case even reached trial. It dismissed the federal trafficking claims outright, ruling that buyers weren't liable as traffickers under the statute as it existed at the time. The case proceeded only on the narrower state law claims of assault, battery, and a Rockland County provision covering crimes of violence motivated by gender. Trial began in October 2012, almost 2.5 years after the hotel room in Montebello. Fierro testified in detail about a painful, non-consensual encounter, her fear, her attempts to push him away. the aftermath that followed, including the depression that lingered in the years afterward. The defense countered by portraying her as experienced rather than coerced, pointing to her prior history as a runaway with connections to strip clubs and arguing Taylor had no reason to suspect either force or her real age. Allred's side leaned on the same physical evidence she had raised at sentencing, the visible injuries, the distress Fierro testified she displayed in that hotel room, to argue that a reasonable person in Taylor's position should have recognized something was wrong before the encounter ever happened. The defense's entire case rested on the opposite premise, that nothing in the room gave Taylor any reason to think twice. Then Taylor took the stand. This is where his reactions stopped being filtered through an attorney and became, for the only extended stretch in the entire saga, his own direct testimony. He described Fierro as very, very pretty, said she told him she was 19, and denied noticing any sign of distress, testifying that she didn't seem to have a problem and didn't tell me to stop. But mixed into that denial was something closer to the regret his attorney had described back in 2010. Asked about how he felt looking back, Taylor offered the closest thing to a direct apology Fierro ever received from him in public. "I feel for what she has gone through. At the time, I wasn't a bad person, and if I had known what was going on, I would have helped her. I hope the best for her." He called himself a sensitive person who loved people and insisted that as far as he knew at the time, she was in good hands. The jury didn't take long. After roughly 1 hour of deliberation on October 26, 2012, they ruled in Taylor's favor on all remaining state claims, finding the encounter consensual from his perspective and finding him not liable for failing to recognize signs of coercion, no damages, no civil judgment against him. This is the moment Taylor's reaction shifted Register entirely, from relief to celebration. He gave a thumbs up in court, hugged Adala, and signed the verdict sheet. Outside the courthouse, he lit a cigar, and he gave the entire ordeal a single word: redemption. It's worth sitting with that word, because it's the one Taylor chose to define an outcome that started with the 16-year-old girl who'd been beaten and trafficked into a hotel room. He went further, telling reporters he planned to focus on repairing his broken life, citing the decades of personal struggle that had defined his public image since retirement. He offered a kind of generational defense for his own conduct, framing the encounter as a product of a different era entirely. "We're not in the 80s. We're not in the 90s anymore. You have to govern yourself accordingly." Fierro's reaction was the inverse of his. She cried in court and left quickly. Allred and her co-counsel expressed disappointment with the verdict, but maintained that the case had given Fierro a public voice and had pushed the conversation around buyer accountability in trafficking cases further than it had gone before, even if the jury in this particular case didn't agree that Taylor bore civil responsibility. Later legal precedent, in cases like U.S. v. Youngers, would go on to clarify that buyers can face federal sex trafficking liability, but that shift in the law came after Taylor's case had already closed, too late to apply to him. Limited public information exists on Fierro's life after the verdict. She has not pursued further high-profile legal action against Taylor that reached major news. Meanwhile, the man who had actually trafficked Fierro had already been dealt with separately and far more severely. Davis was not a first-time offender. In 1994, he had been sentenced to 813 to 25 years for first-degree manslaughter after firing a gun into a crowd and killing an innocent bystander, along with related robbery and weapons charges. He was on parole for that conviction at the time he trafficked Fierro to Taylor. Rashid Davis pleaded guilty in March 2011 to enticing or facilitating interstate travel to engage in a commercial sex act, a lesser charge than the sex trafficking count that originally carried a 15-year mandatory minimum. He objected publicly to being called a pimp, but accepted responsibility for the underlying conduct. In August 2011, he was sentenced to 7 years in federal prison, followed by 5 years of supervised release before U.S. District Judge Naomi Rice Buchwald. He forfeited the $300 in proceeds in his 1999 Mercedes at his own sentencing with Fierro present. Davis offered 2 words of his own: "I'm sorry for what happened." 2 men, 2 reactions, 2 very different outcomes attached to the same hotel room. Davis went to federal prison for 7 years. Taylor lit a cigar. The aftermath and the legacy. The civil verdict closed the legal chapter of the case, but it didn't close Taylor's relationship with the sex offender registry that the sentence had created. As a level 1 registrant in Florida, he was required to keep his address updated with local law enforcement. And that single administrative requirement has generated the bulk of his legal trouble in the years since. In December 2021, he was arrested in Broward County, Florida, for failing to update his address, spending several hours in jail before posting bond. His attorney described it as a mix-up. In July 2024, the same scenario repeated in Pembroke Pines, a felony warrant, this time tied to an address change around his divorce. He turned himself in, was released without bail, and the case was closed without further escalation. His attorney again called it a misunderstanding. What's striking about both incidents is what they aren't. Neither involve new allegations of misconduct. Both stem from paperwork, not new charges, but both also keep the original 2010 case in headlines more than a decade after it was supposed to be resolved. Every arrest is, functionally, a forced relitigation of the same sentence, dragging the same registry status back into public view each time. The 2011 sentence itself, viewed against the rest of Taylor's legal history, looks less like an outlier and more like part of a pattern. His first brush with serious consequences came in 1988, when a second positive cocaine test triggered a 30-day, 4-game suspension from the NFL, at the time, one of the league's most prominent drug enforcement actions, and still nowhere close to ending his career. After retirement, the arrests kept coming, and the penalties kept landing softly. A 1996 attempt to buy $100 of crack cocaine in Myrtle Beach resulted in 60 hours of community service, no jail. A 1998 arrest in St. Pete Beach, Florida, for buying crack and possessing paraphernalia eventually folded into a 2001 New Jersey conviction that carried a $1,100 fine. His tax evasion case for failing to report roughly $48,000 in income from a pub he owned ended in 3 months of house arrest, 5 years probation, and 500 hours of community service. No prison there either. Even a 2016 DUI, after he sideswiped a Florida Highway Patrol vehicle on the Florida Turnpike, resolved with 1 year of probation and a 9-month license suspension. Run the list end to end and the 2011 sentence stops looking unusual. It looks consistent. One more entry in a decades-long pattern of serious charges resolving into probation, fines, and community service, never prison. That registry status sits in stark contrast to the other half of Taylor's public identity, the half that has nothing to do with courtrooms. On the field, he is still, by wide consensus, one of the most disruptive defensive players the sport has ever produced. Drafted 2nd overall in 1981, he won Defensive Rookie of the Year and Defensive Player of the Year in the same season, a feat no one else has matched. He went on to 10 straight Pro Bowls, 8 first-team All-Pro selections, a unanimous NFL MVP award in 1986, and 2 Super Bowl rings. John Madden once said Taylor changed the way defense is played, the way pass rushing is played, the way linebackers play, and the way offenses block linebackers. As big an impact as Madden said he'd ever seen from a single player. Bill Belichick, his defensive coordinator with the Giants, has called him simply the greatest defensive player in NFL history. Joe Theismann, on the other end of Taylor's most infamous hit, said it plainly. To me, he's the standard by which you measure everything. That standard reshaped the sport at a structural level. Washington coach Joe Gibbs built the 2 tight end set and the H-back position specifically to slow him down, and offenses around the league began drafting and paying premium money for left tackles, athletic enough to mirror his speed off the edge, a shift in roster priorities that still shapes how teams build their offensive lines today. Taylor was inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame in 1999, on the first ballot despite the legal issues already attached to his name. His son delivered his induction speech. In it, Taylor thanked his family for putting up with me for all those years. That tension, Hall of Fame on one side of the ledger, registry compliance hearings on the other, has not resolved itself with time. If anything, it resurfaced in a more public way in 2025 when President Donald Trump appointed Taylor to the President's Council on Sports, Fitness, and Nutrition. Taylor took part in the signing event reviving the presidential fitness test and was candid about not fully understanding the scope of the role while saying he was there to serve. The appointment drew criticism specifically because of the 2010 case, proof that even 15 years later, the sentence still follows him into rooms that have nothing to do with football or trafficking law. His financial picture has followed a similarly uneven arc. Taylor earned roughly $50 million over his career, but most of it is gone, spent on the lifestyle that fueled both his on-field intensity and his legal history, lost to taxes, bad investments, and addiction. Recent estimates put his net worth in the $200,000 to $300,000 range, supported now mostly by a Hall of Fame pension, appearance fees, and whatever residuals come from documentaries and books about the very life that cost him the rest of it. He has owned luxury homes in the past, but has since faced financial downsizing, a contrast to the man who once spent thousands a day during his playing career. Physically, that life has caught up with him too. In late April 2026, Taylor, then 67, was hospitalized in Morristown, New Jersey for a stomach-related issue reported as pancreatitis. He was discharged around May 5 and returned to Florida, with his attorney saying he was recovering and looking forward to getting back to golf. What's changed in the years since the cigar and the redemption comment is less about the legal record and more about how Taylor talks about himself when football comes up instead of court dates. In 2025, he visited the Giants training facility and spoke to the defense about preparation and gelling as a unit, admitting he was simply too old to play anymore but still in love with the game. In a sit-down on the show Maintaining W. Tyrus, that same reflective tone showed up again, this time framed explicitly around the idea of redemption, not the courtroom kind, but the personal kind.
That makes you a role model to brothers like myself is that you show what it is, what redemption is. You can be at that point of no return, and then you come back.
Taylor's response to that framing wasn't denial, and it wasn't a highlight reel of accomplishments. It was something closer to contentment.
The last time I saw you, and it's real brief, but like you have a glow about you, man. You just happiness.
I have a different, look on life and stuff. Hey, I'm tell you what, I'm cool with me.
That line, "I'm cool with me," sits a long way from "I'm not that important," the deflection he offered reporters back in 2010. It sits an even longer way from Fierro's words on sentencing day, the ones about something precious being taken from her, words that don't carry the same closure his do. No publicly reported new sexual misconduct charges have surfaced against Taylor since 2012, and his post-verdict legal history has stayed limited to the registry paperwork rather than new allegations. As of mid-2026, he remains a registered level 1 sex offender in Florida, a status that doesn't expire and follows him to every appearance, every council seat, and every golf outing, regardless of how the rest of the story has played out since. Whatever judgment history settles on, the public record shows a man who walked through the entire process. Arrest, denial, plea, sentence, lawsuit, verdict, and came out the other side still calling it redemption, still drawing Hall of Fame appearances, and still somehow giving the same answer the sentence itself gave him 15 years ago. Relief, not jail, and a life that kept going forward. Enjoying the content? Make sure to check out the suggested videos by clicking the cards on your screen.